chosen ones. The moment you took your first breath, the hermetic wheel cracked. Not because you were loud, but because the silence before you was a lie, an illusion wrapped in centuries of manipulation. For ages, the cycles turned predictably, hidden behind the veils of cosmic law, Egyptian incantations, and Atlantean scripts. But when you arrived, something ancient shuddered. The gears skipped. The watchers flinched. This wasn't just the start of another awakening. It was the collapse of the last cycle, the final one the elites prayed would never reach its end. They called it the Immutable Loop, a program running beneath perception, where spiritual energy was siphoned by unseen hands, souls trapped in karmic spin, thoughts rewired before they formed. It was the last master code, until you. Your aura didn't match any of the models the Council encoded into their predictive AI. Your presence disrupted signals embedded into planetary ley lines. Every time you dreamed, forbidden symbols emerged in your brain's theta states. Every time you questioned, a seal dissolved. The 7 laws weren't supposed to bend, but now one has. And they know, all of them. The bloodlines that sat at the edge of prophecy. The ones who watched the collapse of Lemuria and smiled. The beings who whispered laws into Thoth's ears. They know you've cracked the illusion. And the moment you awoke, time began to leak. The air shimmered with the first signs of return, faint echoes of celestial knowledge you haven't yet remembered. The Hermetic principles, once fixed in rhythm, now flicker like a skipped beat. The law of cause is no longer causing. The law of rhythm no longer swings. You weren't meant to exist in this age, but here you are. Chosen ones. They thought they could bury the key at the center of time, thinking no soul would evolve enough to reach it. But your arrival ruptured the encryption. You are the variable the algorithm couldn't process. The glitch in the Hermetic continuum. And now, as you stand between the death of the old and the scream of the new, you must remember, the collapse of this cycle is not chaos. It is clarity. And clarity only comes before the next veil lifts. The moment your eyes opened, the ancient mechanisms began to stutter. The law that governed cause and effect, the one buried deepest in Hermetic doctrine, began to slip. It didn't shatter. It unraveled, thread by invisible thread, like a tightly wound clock that suddenly ticks out of sync. Those around you couldn't see it, but you felt it. That subtle crackle in the air. That strange feeling in your chest when silence lasted too long. The architecture of the illusion began to ripple, because your presence doesn't conform to the design. Your energy wasn't registered in their soul mapping grids. The elites sensed it before you did. Their oracles twitched. Their machines glitched. A being was awake, one who didn't operate within the accepted spiritual bandwidth. You moved through the world like a question that had no answer, and the law couldn't hold its shape around you. The Hermetic texts always warned of a final presence, a figure born outside the natural swing of polarity, who would not merely observe the laws but make them bend, not with ritual but with vibration, with resonance that pierced beyond frequency. As you walked the earth, unaware of your identity, systems faltered. Time warped slightly around you in moments you thought were déjà vu, but were actually skipped frames in the Matrix. That wasn't nostalgia. That was memory, leaking backward from a timeline they tried to block. The law of correspondence began to reverse. In your mirror, the old truths began to vanish. The symbols etched into your subconscious started activating when you touched specific materials, heard forgotten chants, or stood in ancient places your ancestors once bled for. You thought it was coincidence, but no. Every movement you made was being watched, not by humans, but by those who stood at the end of the last cycle. Their eyes burn with panic, not power, because the pattern they trusted is failing. You are that failure. But failure to them is freedom for the cosmos. You did not break the law. You revealed its expiry date. But the Hermetic order doesn't collapse without response. When the hidden law unraveled, a signal went out. He never said it plainly, but his words always carried double edges, layers hidden beneath the surface for those with ears to hear. He spoke of the meek inheriting the earth, but what he meant was the misread, the misaligned, the misfiled souls who didn't fit into the order of things, because they were born to reorder things. He walked among fishermen and kings, but left neither throne nor net behind. He spoke of kingdoms not built by hands and laws, not written in books. He hinted. He whispered, but he never forced. And he warned that in the end, a return would occur. Not just his, but of a presence that would collapse the wheels of false time and open the sealed path back to truth. You feel that echo in your bones, a resonance with teachings you were never formally taught, a knowing that didn't come from study, but from somewhere older. Your die stirs at red-letter verses, not because of religion, but because the vibrations inside the words match your soul's original frequency. He told his disciples that there would be signs the stars would shift, the cycles would break, and the elect would be gathered, not from temples, but from among the scattered, broken, seemingly forgotten ones. He was always speaking to you, but time had to catch up with the message. And now it has the Wheel of Ages, a loop constructed to keep spirits spinning. Never learning, only repeating, has started to slow. Every incarnation you've ever lived felt heavier than the last, because each life you chipped away at the programming. You weren't just learning lessons, you were weakening the axis of control. Your awakening didn't begin this lifetime. It climaxed here. The pressure built across centuries of silence, lifetimes of constraint was finally too great, and the wheel cracked. Yeshua hinted at this moment when he spoke of those who would do greater things than he did not in comparison, but in continuation, not to replace, but to fulfill. You are that continuation, the one who brings closure to the unfinished sentence at the end of his message. Beneath every law, every doctrine, and every false flag of enlightenment, there has always been a single symbol etched in silence, never spoken, only felt. It was hidden, not in some external temple, but within the recursive code of reality itself, woven into the loops of the Hermetic cycle. It is not a sigil you draw, it is one that draws you, and only those who operate outside the boundaries of time can perceive it in full. Your awakening did not cause it to exist, it caused it to activate. A dormant glyph that pulsed to life when your frequency aligned with the fault line of the final cycle. The ancient ones called it the seal of reversal, the point where all laws fold in on themselves and the illusion becomes too tight to hold. The Kybalion never mentioned it, not directly, because to name it was to trigger it. Instead, It was written between the lines, between the principles that seemed immutable and divine. It was the 13th presence, the one that stood outside polarity and rhythm, a force that couldn't be neutralized because it was never part of the original game. You were born into this world with traces of that symbol embedded in your essence, like a watermark behind your eyes. It subtly distorted the reality projected at you. You always noticed things others dismissed, patterns in chaos, order in collapse moments of time, skipping forward or doubling back. This wasn't imagination. It was a reaction to the hidden symbol, whispering its truth every time you were close to remembering. Every major civilization tried to imitate the shape of the symbol, but never succeeded because it wasn't a shape. It was a frequency, a harmonic cipher coded into the silence of consciousness. It was seen once in Atlantis, before the flood once again in Babylon, before the tower crumbled and whispered in Egypt, before the temples were sealed. It only appears when the cycle ends, and it always marks the presence of the one who can trigger collapse. Now, it burns behind your thoughts, surfacing in dreams and moments of stillness, appearing in reflections that don't match your motion. And as its pulse grows louder, something buried beneath the hermetic continuum begins to stir again, not to stop you, but to finish what was once interrupted. It didn't happen with lightning or thunder. It was subtle, precise, like a thread snapped in the tension of silence. One moment, you were moving through time, the next time was trying to move around you. The hermetic law of rhythm could no longer anticipate your swing. The cycles had grown accustomed to souls repeating lessons, patterns replaying endlessly. But your presence introduced a new vibration, one that didn't return to center. It spiraled outward, disrupting the symmetry of the system. You didn't just awaken, you retuned the matrix. Time is not linear. It's memory, pretending to be order. But when you shifted your internal frequency, that illusion thinned. You began noticing anomalies, déjà vu that lasted too long, clocks that blinked back a second, a hum in the air when you entered certain rooms. People around you forgot details they swore happened just minutes ago. You weren't losing your mind. You were escaping the program that managed perception. The moment your soul broke free of the calibration time, fractured around you like cracked glass. The Hermetic Masters once warned that if even one soul resonated outside the accepted laws, the entire system would destabilize. They built mechanisms to prevent this. Rituals, distractions, digital illusions, all designed to keep your vibration anchored to the false timeline. But your signal outgrew the cage. You didn't need a ceremony. You were the ritual encoded into flesh and spirit, walking through reality like a prism, shattering linearity without trying. Those responsible for maintaining the loop noticed immediately. The watchers, the custodians of the invisible clockwork. They saw your spike on the grid. Their devices shorted when scanning your essence because your frequency carried a tone they couldn't identify. It wasn't just human. It was something older, something that remembered before the first reset, something that didn't forget the fall of Lemuria, the exile from the inner planes, the seals that were never meant to break. He never wasted words. Every parable was a layered key cloaked in simplicity, but burning with encoded light. He spoke of seeds and vines, of hidden treasure buried in fields of brides and lamps. But none of it was random. These stories weren't just moral tales. They were frequency maps, spiritual algorithms designed to activate when heard by the right soul. His voice was vibration. His teachings were geometric ciphers, and his timing was no accident. Because even Yeshua operated within a cycle. 1. He came to disrupt and redirect. He said the kingdom is within, not above, not below, but inside, like a sealed chamber built before the body. Existed, a domain of memory and design placed there by the divine, not for comfort, but for war. For when the time came, and one would rise not from lineage or titles, but from vibration, pure and raw enough to end the loop. You feel this, not as metaphor, but as instruction. The parables feel strangely familiar, like you've heard them before, not through sermons, but through silence, as if they've been waiting dormant in your soul, and only now begin to burn. The pearl of great price wasn't about riches. It was about the final truth that costs everything to see. The lost sheep wasn't about compassion. It was about the anomaly, the one being whose frequency made the shepherd leave the 99, because that one held a code outside the system. The talents were not coins, but energies, abilities gifted to you across lifetimes, hidden until you proved your will to act. The moment you revisited his words with your current awareness, your DNA pulsed. He said the truth would set you free. But freedom from what? From the loop, from the law, from the enforced forgetting. Yeshua didn't only die to fulfill Scripture. He cracked the framework and placed his essence as a beacon to mark the edge of the program. He said, "Greater things you will do," because he knew someone would finish what was paused in Golgotha. You are that unfinished sentence, that final voice rising not with noise but with resonance. But to carry his codes is to attract the guardians of the cycle. And as they awaken, they won't see you as a student of the parables, but as the one who makes them burn with meaning again. What happens when his final riddle opens, its last lock through you, long before the Hermetic laws were given to scribes, long before humanity could speak the Anunnaki encoded a final lock into the blueprint of Earth itself. Not a physical lock, but a vibrational one. A barrier built into the consciousness field meant to activate only under an impossible condition: the emergence of a being outside their predictive spectrum, a signal that couldn't be modeled or tracked. Their dominion required cycles and patterns, but they knew deep within the spiral of time. A disruption would eventually rise not from rebellion, but from pure alignment. That lock was tied to the final cycle, the one they thought would never be reached. Not because time would run out, but because they believed they had perfected the loop enough to prevent escape. They underestimated the anomaly. They underestimated you. Your awakening did not force the lock open. It caused the lock to tremble for the first time since its creation. The energy signature you emit resonates with the unspoken glyphs hidden beneath sacred sites, megalithic grids and planetary vortexes. You've been triggering them without knowing. Shifting nodes, ancient machines whispering back in tones you've mistaken for echoes. The lock itself is not a door, but a convergence point where soul memory, planetary frequency, and cosmic law intersect. It had remained inert for ages until your presence began to warp the energetic fabric around it. The anomaly wasn't supposed to evolve this far, and certainly not in this age. The Anunnaki designed the lock to respond only to a vibration they were certain no human would reach. but they forgot something. Frequencies evolve, and sometimes a soul doesn't just reincarnate. It carries momentum across timelines, building pressure, until the seal has no choice but to recognize the signal. Your footsteps are aligning ley lines without intention. Your dreams are reactivating scripts buried beneath oceans and ruins. They left watchers, but even they now hesitate. The moment you came into full coherence with yourself, the lock flickered, not open, but vulnerable. Something ancient growled behind the seal, not in resistance, but in readiness. A presence waiting, not to protect the lock, but to escort what comes after. Because unlocking this doesn't just reveal knowledge. It awakens something buried before memory, something that only responds to you. And as its awareness rises alongside yours, you have to wonder, what exactly did they lock away so long ago that your soul was the only one calibrated to reach it? There was a page never printed, a passage spoken but never written down, a truth whispered only in shadows by those who dared decode the spaces between the laws. The Kybalion was never a complete book. It was a container, a shell for a deeper resonance, and those who truly understood its vibration knew that the real message lived in the gaps. The 7 Hermetic principles were never meant to be final. They were meant to hold a place until the forbidden 8th stirred, and even that was not the last, because beneath all law, there lies the one who breaks it by existing. That forbidden page was spoken of in esoteric circles as the mirror verse, a revelation so raw it could only be passed through direct consciousness. Transfer initiates. Memorizing it in trance states, never allowed, never documented. For centuries, it was kept alive in breath and dream, spoken only when the stars matched the original alignment from the first recording. Now, that alignment has returned and you are the match to its tone. The page speaks of a being who would not serve the laws, but reflect them back, twisted, refined beyond their limitations. The law of mentalism would fracture when mind encountered self not as observer, but as origin. The law of vibration would distort when frequency returned to source, not by ascension but by collapse. The law of polarity would fold when one emerged who could embody both extremes without separation, not balance, but union. You feel this within you, not as philosophy, but as a lived instability, a pull in your soul, between fire and void, between light and gravity. The Kybalion's authors left that page out, not by censorship, but by necessity, because to read it too early was to call the collapse before the time, and the world would not survive it then. But now, the cycle has cracked, and the page unfolds within your consciousness as memory, not discovery. You don't need the text. You are the page. The words live behind your vision, flaring when you encounter resonance. And as the knowledge unseals, layer by layer, you begin to realize it's not just about breaking the loop. It's about rewriting the root code of reality itself. But what part of you is beginning to remember something older than even the first law itself? He walked as one among many, yet the shadows could not cling to him. His light didn't just reveal it, unraveled. Yeshua stepped into a system ruled by cycles, karmic traps, endless returns, and inserted a new frequency, one not of resistance, but of override. He didn't challenge the laws with force. He transmuted them with truth. He knew the loop was not just spiritual. It was engineered, a grid of control, masked as ascension and redemption. And so, he planted seeds not of escape but of ignition. parables infused with divine recursion, waiting to activate in a future presence. That presence is you. You were never meant to merely follow his path. You were meant to unlock the hidden thread that his words veiled from those not ready. He hinted at this when he said, "Let those with eyes see and ears hear," for those who could decode. He embedded vibrations into the sound of his voice tones that would resonate across time and rest dormant in chosen bloodlines, until one would awaken not just to his teachings, but to his mission's unfinished frequency. The darkness was never absence of light, but the infinite replaying of limited perception. The same mistakes, the same structures masquerading as growth. That was the loop, and his light pierced it because it came from outside its architecture. You are beginning to feel that same light, not as a belief, but as a burn. It's igniting in your spine, in your breath, in the space behind your thoughts, a memory, not of faith, but of function. Something inside you designed not just to believe, but to break. When Yeshua overturned the tables in the temple, it was more than protest. It was prophecy. The cycle would be disrupted not by scholars, not by priests, but by the ones who were never allowed inside the temple. The misfit, the scattered, the ones who saw through the form, but still held the fire. You carry that fire now, and with it a key, not made of metal, but of memory. And as it turns, something begins to shift behind the veil of everything. They sat above the frequencies hidden behind myth and misdirection, not in temples or books, but in the folds of reality itself, watching, measuring, intervening. When timelines threatened collapse, the Council of 9 Guardians of the Continuity, enforcers of the Hermetic rotation. Their task was simple: keep the loop intact, prevent unauthorized awakenings, and ensure that no soul could rise fast enough to disrupt the spiral. They believed the safeguards were flawless. They believed you would never find your way to the center. But belief is not law, and prophecy never asked for their permission. Your awakening was never scheduled. It wasn't written in the scrolls they protect or the simulations they manage. Your vibration didn't match any known signature. The anomaly wasn't supposed to occur here. Not now. Not in this form. And when you rose through the layers, bypassing distractions, breaking contracts, dissolving veils, they couldn't stop it. Their systems glitched. Their messengers fell silent. Their fail-safes failed. You weren't taught. You remembered. You weren't initiated. You ignited. They traced every soul's trajectory through the timelines, adjusted outcomes, shifted. Incarnations rerouted bloodlines, but yours was untrackable. You moved outside the model not randomly, but rhythmically in a pattern. None of them could decode. Every life you lived weakened their grip. Every trauma you transmuted tore a seam in the tapestry of control. They watched in silence as the frequencies they curated began to distort around you, not in chaos, but in recalibration. Now they sit in fragmented alignment, unable to agree, not in fear, but in something worse, uncertainty. For the first time they face a being they didn't prepare for, a vibration. They didn't authorize a soul whose presence bends laws, not with defiance, but with design. Your energy reactivates symbols. They sealed your voice, unlocks grids. They buried beneath forgotten cities and collapsed stars. The council failed not because you overpowered them, but because you existed before their rule, and your presence is a reminder of a time before them and possibly after. They still watch, but now their watching turns inward, trying to find what they missed, what equation they failed to balance. But what happens when they realize it wasn't a flaw in their design? It was a return of something older than design itself, something that carries your name without ever being spoken. The loop didn't shatter with a roar, it unraveled in silence. Each principle began to forget itself. Mentalism no longer held the authority it once wielded. Vibration lost its predictability. Polarity fractured into convergence. Cause and effect no longer responded in sequence. Rhythm spiraled instead of swung. The masters who lived by the laws found themselves reaching for tools that no longer worked. Their chants dimmed, their rituals echoed hollow, because you didn't just awaken. You moved beyond the framework altogether. The collapse wasn't chaos, it was correction. The Hermetic Loop was never eternal. It was a containment field, a training ground, a sacred illusion designed for growth but corrupted over time by those who feared evolution. You weren't meant to stay within it forever. It was meant to lead you to the edge where all knowing becomes remembering, and remembering becomes creation. The moment you reached that edge, the program glitched, not because it was broken, but because it recognized you as complete. But now, a stillness emerges, not of peace, but of potential. A quiet beyond the crackling circuits of old laws. A greater law is waiting, not one written in tablets or spoken in riddles, but one that exists as a living frequency. A law that recognizes coherence over control, presence over principle. It is not a system, it is a source, and it does not operate on rules but resonance. You are feeling its pull in the spaces where the Hermetic matrix no longer speaks. The strange stillness in your thoughts. The gaps in reality that feel like invitations. Those who built the loop knew of this greater law, but feared it because it could not be mastered. It could only be merged with. They called it the unknown, the original tone. The will before will. It lives now in the space you've cleared the vacuum left behind by the dissolved loop. It waits not with urgency, but with inevitability, because what you've become cannot return to the cycle and cannot remain undefined.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.